We got a new moon in Libra this week, along with Mars and Mercury in a tight, intense conversation. Now, with Venus leading us in this new beginning, this week is all about contracts and economies. And what about the contracts and economies that can help facilitate the best relationships and partnerships for a real sense of balance in the law and overall society, right? So then what would that look like? What would it feel like? What would it smell like? What would it taste like? And can we believe and remember the present that we are in right now so we can actually vision futures and other possibilities? And with the grand trine forming at the same time of this new moon and this Mars and Mercury conversation, memory and remembering is here alongside the dead. Let's get into it, y'all, okay? So this is the weekly forecast for October 19th through the 25th, what I'm calling the new moon in Libra, renegotiating the contracts of our lives. So welcome back to Yapping with the Stars, the show where I talk about life and spirit with the help of the planets, stars, and zodiacs, and a little bit of common sense thrown in there as well. So I am your host and guide, Nicole Rouse, a storyteller who comes from a line of storyteller who weaves and tells stories in many different ways. And here I work with astrology and ethnography to explore the stories of what it means for us to be human. Because right now the present is up for grabs. So who is leading the stories that will bring us into our futures? All right, now every Sunday we check into the chaos we call society and ask two questions. What's the cosmos showing us this week? And what are we being called to move, create, burn, build, or reflect upon? Okay. And y'all, it's an intense week. It's been intense. It's going to continue to be intense. So let's talk about then how we engage with this energy and with this intensity. And this week, it's also pretty busy. The sky's busy, and so am I personally. So here's where you can find me both in person and online starting tonight. So if you're in the Chicagoland area, I've got two in-person events coming up. Tonight, I will be at Jackhammer up in the north side of Chicago from 6 p.m. till about 12 a.m., doing mini astrology pop-up readings at the Queer Dance Party Funk Stick. Now, I love Funk Stick. I've talked about them before. Leo will be a part of Queer and Chaos conversations in the future when we talk about pleasure and play and the dance space. And what Leo is curated is a queer dance party, 21 and up, that your finances should not prohibit you from coming in, shaking some ass, meeting some folks, having a good time. It's about community and communing through and with the body. So if you are in Chicago and you want to get out tonight, 6 p.m., come up to Jackhammer and you can get a 20-minute mini astrology reading from me, just $30. You get a little bit of a taste to see what the cosmos has to say for you, especially as we're coming up to this new moon in Libra, which is going to be happening on Tuesday, y'all. And Tuesday is also when I have the first of my 5 Queering Chaos conversations. I'm very excited for this, y'all. This is part of my project, Queering Chaos project, that I am working with in production with my co-producer, Forrest Brooks. And so what we will be doing is hosting these conversations at Dorothy Downstairs every 5th Tuesday of the month from October to February. And this month, we're going to be talking about how we queer spirit and spirituality, which is really timely because it's October. We're going into Halloween next week, along with the Day of the Dead, All Saints Day. This is what they call the kind of thinning of the veil. Scorpio season starts the next day. So this is a time in which we are being asked to reflect, to review, especially in the Northern Hemisphere, and come back and settle down into spirit, into the kind of grounding of home, of harvest. And so what does it mean for us to work with spirit outside of the norms we have been given? What does it mean for us to queer our understanding of engagement with our own spirit and therefore how that impacts spirituality? So I'll be talking with 4 Black and Brown queer spiritualists, Charlene Kelama Bruja, who's an Petabi and reader, Reverend Kim Crutcher, who is a herbalist, shaman, therapist, J.T. Perry, who is a hoodooist, mystic, and writer, and Tristan with Body with Tristan, who is a body worker. And we'll be sitting around essentially communing with spirit. I'll be calling the queer spirits who walk with us and who are working with us for our liberation as well. And we'll talk with the community, or with the audience too. So come on out on the 21st, Tuesday, for the first of 5 Queer and Chaos conversations, okay? And this actually goes right into what I'll be offering later this week online. So if you've been interested in taking more kind of in-depth seminars with me, I have 2 coming up through Big Liz Conjure. The first one is called Death in and the ancestors working with Pluto. So that will be on Thursday, the 23rd at 7 p.m. online. And if you can't make the live reading, y'all, you can still have access to the recording. There are two options for a purchase. And in this seminar, what I'm going to do is go over the concepts of death, the dead, who the ancestors are, and how that's been kind of shaken up and remixed in these colonial projects, and how, if we look at Pluto, which is a generational planet in our astrology charts, how that can help give us insight into what our generational work is around our re-engagement with the concepts of death, dying, and the ancestors, but then looking at your own personal chart, your own personal relationship to it. No prior astrology knowledge is needed. I have instructions of how to run your chart as part of the description on the Big Liz Conjure website. So you can find more information about that in the show notes of how to sign up. And then if you're interested in understanding how to work with astrology to activate your own spiritual gifts, that's what I'll be teaching next Monday, the 29th online. Again, you can purchase a live or recorded version of the seminar. And there, what I do is explain and break down what is spirit and spirituality, and how working with the astrology chart, looking at houses 4, 8, and 12, you can start to engage with how to activate your own spiritual gifts, which really is activating your body, because your body is the first technology and the first altar. So those are different ways in which you can engage with me this week as we start to close out this month. Now, this has been a really interesting week that just passed. I know last episode I talked about the impact of the full moon in Aries, right? And I asked folks to kind of reflect upon that. And as we're going into this new moon in Libra, there's a way that this week has really been about remembering. And what do we remember? Who do we remember, and why? And it was funny because last night I went to the Brandy and Monica concert in Chicago that was very long. I'm not going to lie. There was like 3 opening acts. Kelly Rowland was one of them. She was amazing. But sound was a little off, I'm not going to lie. And then it ended up abruptly. Brandy was on. She sounded great. She was singing. And then in the middle of the song ended, Monica came on, finished with, I believe, Angel of Mine, and just left the stage. And the lights came on, and we didn't know what the hell was going on. So folks are pissed online talking about this, right? And but it was interesting because before the show started, I got there around 7:30 or so. The show started at 8. They had an MC and a DJ out there warming the crowd up. And the MC, he was good. I'm not gonna lie, he was good, and he was kind of going down memory lane with music. Definitely a old millennial Gen X crowd, and so they were playing a lot of the different songs and dances from the 99s and 2000s, right? Especially if you grew up on any kind of Dirty South, any kind of any kind of 99s and 2000s waves of music, right? Especially Cash Money, Juvenile, all of them. And it was really interesting because it was a lot of memories, right? A lot of nostalgia, and having the body remember by warming it up, by dancing, right? So remember hitting the Soldier Boy, and then doing and then snap your fingers, do your step. You can do it all by yourself, like all these songs, right? And for me, I love Wipe Me Down. So as we're going to go through and folks are singing, and we're all doing these dances and don't know each other, it's really interesting to think about the power of music, and the power of music to get people to coordinate, right? Without them knowing each other. And it invokes memory. Music is really important because it invokes a memory that allows us to remember a different time, another time, a time in the past, a time in the near present, shit, even a time in the future. And when we're thinking about this idea of memory and remembering, right, this is about the water. This is about how we have to flow, right, in the kind of ways that we understand who we are and where we come from. And that's really loud right now. And I am bringing all this up because this is what really is coming up for me as I think about this new moon coming up. Now, today is the 19th when I am recording this, and it's the Mars. Today we're going to have Mars meet Mercury. We call it conjunction. They're going to be right next to each other. They're going to be next to each other for a few days, okay? And this is in Scorpio, so this is a kind of intense, a very intense kind of conversation. This is an intense connection, intensity. This is getting clear and precise about the actions that you want to take. Mars being in Scorpio, the sign that it likes to be in alongside Aries, right? Mars is at home. Mars has not been at home for a very long time. Now, as Mars is at home and it's a personal planet, it's the planet again of our strategy, of our drive, of our passion, of war, of what brings us into action, what we go to, what we fight for. When Mercury is there, we fight with our words, right? The Mercury in Scorpio is a butcher that understands how to cut through the bullshit to get to the point, but also understands that not everything needs to be said. So there can be a strategy in silence. So there's a duality to this energy. So today, if you're finding yourself a bit kind of in your feelings, in your feelings, a bit irritated, agitated, take a step back and breathe and ask yourself, what is the irritation? What is the emotion trying to tell you versus allowing it to just lead and react? Because this is going into the waters, the deep waters of Scorpio. And so when we go into the deep waters, y'all, when we have to cut through the kind of illusions, the kind of concepts that don't really make sense to get to a truth, right? Because Scorpio is about the truth. It's about finding a truth, finding the truth, collecting other people's truths, right? So that you can know and use them in a future. Again, strategy. How do we strategize with our knowing, with the knowledge, with the things that we collect, with the things that we have to decipher and cut through to get to a kind of truth? When you get to the truth, it can hurt, right? When you get to the truth of something, when you get down to the foundations, when you go through the kind of deep waters, the muddy waters, the bounded waters, there is a way that truth coming to light, once you face it, right, what do you do with it? And this is the emotions, y'all. So this is why I'm saying if your emotions are coming up, and with the Mars is emotions that it tends to be associated with are things like passion, anger, rage, but also creativity, right? The urge to create, the urge to do something. When we learn how to work with that our energy, with that Mars, there is a way it can help us cut through and get to the foundations of what it is that we know to be our truth. But then that means we're also then facing darkness to find a light. So right now we're having to face a lot of truths, right? We're having to face a lot of truths in societies, but do we believe? And so I'm talking about belief a lot. Been talking about it for a while. It's going to be a continuous conversation because of the North Node being in Pisces. And now with Saturn retrograding in Pisces, and later this week, Neptune will come back into Pisces. She's retrograde as well. Been hanging out in Aries for a while at 0 degrees, but finally will come back into the deep waters that she loves to be in. It's her home. It's where and what she knows, right? We're going to start to have this grand trine forming. So today we have Mars and Mercury in Scorpio. It is having a conversation, starting to have a conversation with Saturn that again is in Pisces. And Saturn and Pisces and Jupiter are having a conversation and have been for a little bit. And so these are all what we call trines. So it's a major grand trine. Now, with Neptune later this week coming into Pisces and meeting up with Saturn, what we're having is a deep and intense conversation with our emotions. Okay, we are having a deep and intense conversation with our emotions, with our memories, with our spirit and spirituality, and how that impacts our understanding of family roots and home and caring, right? We are going to have to come back into and remembering and understanding that our humanity and to be human is an emotional thing. It is something that you have to grapple with emotionally. In order for do that, you have to believe your emotions. And so when we're talking about this week in this new moon in Libra, I want us to be cautious of making everything kind of what I call that love astrology, love and light. Yes, the astrology on paper looks like, these trines and the new moon in Libra. Libra is ruled by Venus. Venus will be as well in her home sign of Libra. There is this energy, this kind of fruitful energy, this kind of energy of something new. But here's the thing, what are we creating new? What are we quote unquote manifesting? What are we conjuring? What are we remembering and imagining that we then bring into the present? This is what this new moon is really asking us to do. It is a great moon to bring in something new, but that something new has to be grounded in a belief of what is already occurring. Because as we have this new moon again starting today with the Mercury and Mars conjunction in Scorpio, that is starting to form this grand trine that will still be there as we go into Tuesday with this new moon in Libra. We're also going to be having a square. And what are we having a square with? Jupiter. Jupiter will be in a square to this new moon, as well as the new moon will start to form a square to Pluto, because Pluto's only at 1 degree and the new moon's going to be at 28 degrees in Libra. So at the very end of Libra, before it hits into Scorpio, before that moon, for the sun, excuse me, goes into Scorpio, and the moon as well, because the moon will travel first, it is starting to form some tension between the planet of expansion and abundance, Jupiter, in the sign of home, roots, your body, emotions, mothering, motherhood, and the collective, Pluto and Aquarius. Because again, Pluto just went direct last week, as we talked about last episode. But that Pluto direct is in the sign of the collective, right? The water bearer, the one that has to pour out into, right, the collective, into collectives. It's knowing, it's knowledge that it has brought together. So with this grand trine in this new moon in a late degree of 28 degrees, that is also a Cancer degree, y'all, if you do degree theory, there is a way that this new beginning, this new moon, this new manifestation, that we have personal planets in the sign they want to be in, Mars being in Scorpio, Libra, Venus being in Libra. What we're having to do is really take personally and believe exactly what is occurring structurally, right? Do we believe the current moment? This is about the present. This is about getting present, being grounded in the body and believing what is happening. Because Jupiter in Cancer, and again, in that grand trine with with Mercury and Mars and Saturn and Neptune, is also in a square, like I was saying, to this new moon, but it's also in a square to Chiron in Aries at exactly 24 degrees. So as we are having these kind of new beginnings, as there is this kind of new opening when it comes to relationships and justice and balance and equity, it is having us confront the ways in which we have deeply wounded, how the self is deeply wounded, how those in authority have wounded the self via a tension, a restriction, a kind of backlash to the construct of the family, right? This is Cancer. So Jupiter in Cancer is doing some work here this week, y'all. It is the kind of point that a lot of these aspects are meeting, both tense ones in this T-square, but also harmonious ones in this grand trine. So as we are being asked to, again, bring in something new, manifest something new, create something new, that newness must be grounded in memory. You must ground in memory, and memory comes through what? The body. Here we go back again. We're going back to the body, because Cancer is ruled by the moon, right? The moon is the body. It is the emotional body. It is the physical body. It is the way that we engage with it. And do we believe then Jupiter being the planet of abundance, right? Of a good time, of expansion, of wealth, but also of certain types of structure. Saturn rules governmental structures, but Jupiter rules the law. Jupiter rules law and parts of order, how a society is structured. And many times that is the philosophy of it. This is why Jupiter also many times associated with religion and religious ideology, along with knowledge and knowing. It is going to be the education of a population. Let's talk about the US. What are they doing in education right now? How are we being educated in, and how are we being expanded, right? If we think of Jupiter as the dad, right, as the good time dad, how is the good time dad not being so good time right now for us as a collective? right? How is that good time dad then being able to only expand and have abundance for the self, for itself, at the expense of ourselves, a square to Chiron in Aries. And then what are we going to do to activate that? Because again, Aries is ruled by Mars. Mars is in the other sign it likes to be in Scorpio, that is right next to Mercury. So it is time to express ourselves. It is time to use the voice to cut through the shit and strategize in a way that allows us to get to the foundations of stuff and understand that no one is going to come out of this unscathed. No one is going to come out of this somehow clean. It's time to get dirty, right? But dirt is required. But in order for us to get dirty, in order to come through and figure out something different, there has to be a cleansing practice. There has to be a grounding in a practice. What is the practices that we are invoking, right? Because we have, again, Mars and Mercury and Scorpio. Scorpio is the deep waters. Scorpio is also where many times we talk about the occult. We talk about esoteric knowledge as other knowledges. When you go through the deep waters and you go through the depth, it is that as above, so below. You understand that knowledge and knowledge are not just things in the mundane, they are also in the sacred. And in a conversation with Saturn in the deep waters of Pisces, with Neptune being there, this is nothing but spirit, because that North Node's also in Pisces. Pisces rules the collective unconscious. Pisces rules the collective dead. Again, we talk about this all the time in the show, of how the deep waters are where the dead reside, where the ancestors lie, where the dead reside. And I talked about this a little bit last week, but we can expand on it. Is in some traditions, right, that is that other world in the ocean, right? It's not going up to heaven and seeing another world there. It's actually understanding that because we can never know the deep mysteries, I mean, there really is no floor of the ocean. We think we can meet it, but we really can't, because humans are not there. That's where a lot of cultures will say, because that is what the other world is. If the dead are there, that is their world. And then we meet it when we bring land to shore, Cancer, right? When our dead come up and meet us, it is bridging land and shore. It is bridging the sacred and mundane. And so Jupiter being in Cancer is really expanding our understanding of the sacred and mundane, y'all. What is our relationship to religion, to spirit, to spirituality? How have we been taught it through a particular lens, and this being the patriarchal lens? Because if Jupiter is the dad, is the good time dad, and when Jupiter first made its way into Cancer and it squared Saturn, setting the tone for its year-long transit, squaring Saturn and Neptune in Aries, there was a tension between the ways we understand tradition, structures, and understandings of the self, and the stories around that, and the ideology and the kind of philosophy and cosmology around that, and how that is at odds with the ways that those things are actually engaged with via the state. Remember, Jupiter was the patron god of the Roman Empire, of the Roman state. And we are living in the imagination of that Roman Empire, of that Roman state. That is not a conspiracy theory. That is not doing woo-woo shit. That is literally the kind of construction of the Western modern nation state let's talk about before, is when we go to the Enlightenment thinkers, when we go to those Scottish Enlightenment thinkers in particular, and European thinkers in general, in the kind of 17 and 1800s, there was a revitalization of kind of an interest in the Roman Empire and kind of times before the Dark Ages, and this kind of reimagining, again, fan fiction. And so if we understand that a lot of ideas of democracy and citizenship and freedom were framed through that perspective of an empire that was none of those things. It said it was, but it wasn't. Citizenship was predicated upon your ability to be seen as fully human by that state. Either you were a citizen or you were a slave, and it was heavily patriarchal. We are seeing the remnants of that imagination when we don't realize that memory is always with us. What are we remembering and why? Who are we remembering and why? What places in the past are we going to set the present? And if we understand that time right now has to be kind of reconstructed, re-understood, reimagined, we're going to be beholden to the imagination of what already is. And this state has already told us exactly where we're going. We're going straight forward into not just authoritarianism, but a complete hostile takeover of the government, in which it's making it very clear it does not like its citizens. It does not like us. Right? The U.S. does not like us. Big Daddy in the sky don't like our asses right now, right? So what happens if we then take that back? If we engage with the wounding of the self, a wounding of the idea that we would be cared for, I've been talking a lot about this with my roommates because we're all the same age, 44, right? And there's a way that, oh, and we talk again, we talk about this a lot, how we were sold this bill of goods that the older you get, it would get better. And we had templates for that. Like a lot of us saw our parents, even if we grew up struggling, and they were struggling as they got older. Many times we saw folks being able to make it in some way, shape, or form, right? A lot of folks, and the boomers, we call them, or just older generations who were coming up in a time in which housing markets weren't as strong, weren't as stressful. Things were more affordable, and there was access to different kind of government subsidies, right? There was this kind of illusion that if we can just go through and tough it out right at the beginning and bootstrap it in some way, what we call bootstrapping grinding, right? Grinding and hustle culture, especially coming out of '08 in that recession and the kind of gig economy that many of us literally were groomed into believing was our independence. That was some bullshit. Um, what we're seeing now is that that was always a lie too, right? There was always a lie that it was going to it would eventually get better the older we got, that there would be opportunities, that the debt would be good, that the housing would be there, that the opportunities for expansion were available. There's a grief that has to happen, right? We have to grieve that. We have to grieve those stories that we held on to, that folks really allowed to drive action, to drive what folks did and why. If we don't grieve that, then what we end up doing is sitting in nostalgia. And nostalgia will heavily turn into melancholy as a collective. And when we see this in the past as well, we have seen nation states and its citizens sit in this nostalgia and melancholia and then remain stagnant. And what that does is it allows more authoritarian takeover to happen in different ways. It doesn't always look the same. So we also have to, as Saturn or as Neptune goes back into Pisces this week, y'all, we also have to revisit these stories that laid the foundations for our collective cosmology, cosmology being our understanding of our relationship to spirit, the sacred, right? As well as our kind of understanding of the world itself. So that's cosmology, okay? We're going to have to re-examine that, which means that there is going to be a collective grieving. This is all emotions, it's grand trine. Can we get in our feelings, right? Mariah Carey's new album, she got a song called "In Your Feelings," and I can't sing because Mariah can sing, but part of it goes, I think you're getting a little bit too in your feelings, right? And I think a lot of folks are in their feelings. A lot of folks in there, but don't know what to do with it. And when you don't know what to do with your feelings, when those things come up, because again, it's a remembering, the body remembers, y'all. We talk about this shit all the time and have a lot of memes, but don't actually understand what it means in practice. The body will remember. If we don't know how to work with that memory via the emotions, then we sit in this kind of reimagining of the past that always gives it a bit of a more of a veneer of a better veneer than what it really was, right? Yes, Sam. So anytime you feel it's sitting too much in nostalgia, it's sign that something is out of balance, or that I'm holding on to something that no longer is real. And that's the thing, because memories are there to remind us, but we're not supposed to be stagnant in them. And many times we see stagnicity collectively when we don't want to acknowledge change. Paul Gilroy is a Black British academic who wrote this book on post-colonial melancholia back in the 90s. His first book, There Ain't No Black in the Union Jack, and then I think '86, was very popular, explained the ways that in the British Empire and the British state, there's no space for blackness to sit there, even though the construction of the British Empire then forming into the British state was predicated upon, right, the taking of and reinscribing of black bodies. Now, Gilroy's work was foundational, one of the foundational works of a lot of post-colonial theory. He's been trained by Stuart Hall, coming out of that tradition. And when he wrote about post-colonial melancholia, it's a concept in which he was trying to explain the ways that many white working Brits in particular, but the British state in general, sits in this kind of nostalgia of the past, of the empire, the glory days of empire, that many folks were turning to in the present as they were having to face, economy that was heavily heavily shifting, an empire that had collapsed and was in a state of rebuilding, having to figure out how to handle immigration, mass immigration that the state actually brought in to help reconstruct the nation post World War II, because most of Europe was bombed. And so there wasn't enough labor force, literally enough labor bodies to help repair. So that's when you saw a lot of these former empires and colonies and colonists, imperialists turning into nation states with commonwealths, right, quote unquote, opening their borders for workers. But many times these workers stayed, especially post 1945 with the Windrush generation and after, right, that then led to a lot of social change. Now, in that social change, right, you have the River of Blood speech that's said in the 1960s, and you see all of these kind of immigration laws and acts that are passed that will then eventually lead to the present moment of Brexit. Okay, well, Brexit happened a few years ago, but led to the kind of present current momentum of a nation state that has itself gone through 4 prime ministers in a year. The economy is collapsing. They can't afford to literally house and feed and provide power to their own citizens. We're seeing very similar things happening in France as they are being cut off from their commonwealths as well. And people kind of looking to this past, this nostalgia, saying that, well, before it was a good time. And so what the problem is they place the blame on the new immigrants. They place the blame on populations where difference lies, versus taking a step back and asking, okay, was it ever good to begin with? Because when you look at the actual historical record, the British Empire didn't do a goddamn thing for the white working class. The class divide was still strong and became stronger than ever, right? And itself, the propaganda that was needed, this is where you get the newspapers and the serials and the use of print media, right? The idea of imagined communities coming in through print media that is widely distributed. There was a need to use that propaganda to get folks to buy into, because it was fucking expensive. It was expensive. People were complaining about empire and the state sending all these troops externally during that time. But collective memories got short. Collective memories got short and got stagnant once change came knocking at the door, right? Once that Windrush generation opened up and they had to face the reality of what that things that happened off that island had, right? Then what do? You revert back to this kind of blaming of the other, because you have been fed this reimagining of a past that was never true. Nostalgia can get you fucked up, right? It's one thing to remember and to reflect and to almost analyze, right? To see what is it that you remember, what can you learn from it? If you go back into that memory at an older state, knowing more, does that memory change and shift? It should, y'all. It should shift a little bit as you understand and can analyze and make sense of what that past, what that memory was trying to tell you in the present, right? Because time is not linear. If we see time as being in the present, as being in the now. If you're on the Patreon, we read a book that we read, and we did a bunch of stuff about this about a year and a half ago, Michelle M. Wright's book on the what was it? The epistemology of Blackness, I believe it is. It's on the Patreon and one of the collections. But we read her book as a way to kind of interrogate time and reimagine time and understand, if we took time through a understanding of the present versus linear past, present, future, then we shift the sight that we use to even understand what and which past we go back into. Because if we go back into that past, say we took the British Empire once again, if I was a white working Brit, right, and I went into the past and looked at that historical past not through the lens of the state that was being led by folks who were essentially descendants of the gentry, but actually looked at it from the lens of those who were working class at that time and its impact, then your analysis of the present would make it very, very different. Your understanding of your present self would be very different in how you engage with the present. This is what I want you to think about or feel this week, okay? Because memories are going to come up. This new moon again on Tuesday, the 21st, is a good moon for new beginnings, like any new moon. But then what new beginning are we trying to create? It depends upon the ways in which you understand the past that you come from and how you believe the present moment. Because again, this is going to bring up memories, going to bring up emotions. The grand trine is going to bring up stories. It's going to bring up understandings of collective stories, of stories from elders. Saturn is there too, Saturn and Neptune together, right? It's going to be bringing up our understandings of who taught us spirit and spirituality. And we're going to get into that in a minute with some of my yapping. And it's also with Jupiter again having this conversation, it's going to expand all these things, especially in relationship to where we come from, the families we're a part of, the care and nurturing that we need, and how that needs to become part of the strategy, part of the things that we are speaking about, that we are demanding, that we are passionate about. Okay, because that is what is going to allow this new moon in Libra to help us understand what new contracts we need to lay down. Why do I say that? Because Libra rules contracts, y'all. Libra is the air masculine side of Venus, the other side of Venus being Taurus. So Taurus is in this conversation too, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But with Venus being leading this, but it's in her sign of Libra, this is about the scales. Remember, I talked about this, I believe, last week. That Libra is one of the few signs, is the only sign that's an inanimate object. It is the scales, okay? It's the scales of life. And so you have to remember, if you have Libra energy or Libra in general, the middle of those scales has to be you, has to be the body, has to be the self. Why? Because Aries is a sister sign of Libra. That is what allows us. Sister signs give us the balance that we need, that the other sign needs. So for Libra to be in balance, it has to be grounded in the self. That's how you make a goddamn decision, y'all. Okay. But do you know who the self is? So this is what this new moon is trying to illuminate. Well, it goes back to the memories that we remember ourselves from, how we're constituted through. And with Jupiter also being in a square to Chiron and also squaring this new moon. The new moon's going to be at 28 degrees, as I said earlier, but Jupiter is going to be at 24, so it's in a 4-degree orb, and Chiron's have 24 degrees. So there's an opposition between the new moon and Chiron too. And we've been feeling this opposition of Sun Chiron for a little bit now. If you were in your feelings this week, y'all, if there was some triggers that came up around your sense of self and your relationships in particular, your relationships, partnerships, anything around justice and the law, we've seen this shit play out collectively, right, in the ways that we are being played in our face with this government shutdown. And now they're going to take away SNAP benefits, right? And it's so in a time for November in which we're going into holiday season, right? And also at a time in which we're having massive economic downturn, we are seeing the cruelty of the state. Opposition's intentions, y'all. We are seeing the cruelty of the state when it comes to family and care and roots and foundations and home, right? Do we believe? This is about memory, but can we remember the present? Here's the thing. We did know this was going to happen. And this is not about blame anymore. We just got to sit in some hard ass reality. We knew this was going to happen. We knew this was going to happen for a number of different reasons. One, they said it in the Project 2025. It was all laid out. It was all laid out. Whether folks read it or not, it was there. Two, we've already been here before. I've talked about this. Many people talked about this. We've been here before. We already had one presidency in which we saw, exactly what Trump was going to do. Right? He didn't do it all well, but he did play out what he wanted to do. Memory, remembering. Do we remember collectively? No. And because if we do remember, we don't believe. Memory is about embodiment, y'all. It's just not about thinking it. It's not about, kind of sitting in the air of it. Because when you remember something, you usually feel it. It's invoked through something, through a song, through a sight, through a scent, right? Something invokes a memory and it becomes embodied. But if we're not embodied, then if those memories don't do the work they need to do, help us ground in the present to remember what we do and do not want to have happen again. So if we believe that past, if we believe what Trump did before, if we believe what was written, right? If we allowed ourselves to remember from our perspective, not sit in nostalgia and wish that, if we had voted for Hillary, we'd be at brunch right now. Bullshit, y'all. That is a way to disengage from the present and not take responsibility for the fact that we, as a collective, did not believe that man was going to come in and do exactly what he said he was going to do, because our collective memory has been made short and small on purpose. This is what happens when we're not trained as a collective to think. So this is where thinking does come in. When we're not trained to critically engage with our thoughts, because our memories are made short, so therefore we're not taught to engage with the first way we think, which is our stomach. This is the embodied. This is the embodiment. We're not taught to think, y'all. We're not taught to think because we think thinking's in the brain only. We think thinking is a thought that has to kind of be worked through. It's not. That's not the first way we remember. It's not the first way we think. We think through the body, through the stomach. And then the mind makes sense of that stomach so that we can then be whole, right? In this understanding then of what we want, where we're going to go. So then what do we want? I ask this question all the time of myself and everybody else. What do you actually want in your contracts, in your one-on-one relationships? Because Libra rules relationships. It rules the contracts that we require for the relationships. It is law. It is structures. It is balance. It is the equity of society. But how are we taught any of that? Right? We are taught that relationships should not be contractual, even though a relationship is a contract. Right? We have been fed capitalism as the only way to negotiate, when in actuality, capitalism stole the ideas of negotiation and willed it down to its perspective, its memory making, having us believe that to be in a contract with somebody else automatically means exploitation. So maybe we shouldn't do a contract, but then nobody is actually clear about what the hell we're supposed to be doing in this relationship. And so then we're all kind of going off vibes, thinking that we're doing anti-capitalist shit when we are just learning how to exploit ourselves, one another, even better, but couching it in revolutionary action. We got to bring the contract back. I talked about this a few months ago, and I think this new moon is getting really loud for us to renegotiate, to help us understand that we do need to renegotiate because the social contract is broken. We are not going back. We are not going back. We are not going back. And why would we? Here's the thing, nostalgia. Was the past really as good as we say it was? Doesn't mean that it was bad, but I'm saying, was it as good as it say it was? Right? Even when we talked about this idea, what I said earlier about how many of us were fed this idea and saw that as people got older, things just got easier or better, or that, there was just more resources there. That is what we are fed. But how true is that when we really take a step back and look at it from our perspective, from your experiences, from those around you, and put that in a conversation with the structure? So Libra is also about the law, right? It's about how we read the law. It is the air version of Venus. It is the cultural version. It is the cultural worker. So how are we working the culture in a way that allows us to create new contracts that can get us better understandings of the relationships we need when it comes to Cancerian themes of family, of home, of mothering, of care, right? Of the body and working with the emotions. That means that we have to renegotiate the contracts with ourselves. So this is a great time, y'all, to write a new contract, to write a new soul contract. I really do mean this. You are the one that has to lead your life. You are the one that has to lead your life. And this has been the longest conversation or the longest lesson that the stars has been trying to teach us for the past couple of years. With that North Node in Aries, South Node in Libra that we had for 18 months, now going into Virgo and Pisces, we've had to do a lot of renegotiation with the self and with collectives, right? With the balance that we need to create in our lives via taking responsibility for our lives. But when we talk about taking responsibility, there's a way that we have been taught that means taking a blame. And it's not it, y'all. If we put the judgment aside and actually sat in the reality of where we're in and just accepted it, accepted the fact that we have to take responsibility for what comes next. Because if we don't, then we are being complicit in a structure that has already told us what it will do, that has already shown us what we will do, that has already made it clear that it will continue to do this. Who and what do we believe and why? And if we're going to believe ourselves, then we have to realize that we have the power to renegotiate the contract. We cannot leave it up to the state. This new moon in Libra is asking us to renegotiate contracts by taking responsibility and re-engaging with the ways that we understand culture, nostalgia, memory, and care, because we are not being cared for right now. And I say that too because Venus also rules Taurus, as I said earlier. And Taurus is going to start having some activity in November. We get a full moon in Taurus coming up November, I believe, 7th. November 5th Uranus, that is already retrograde in Gemini, is going to make its way back into Taurus. Uranus was in Taurus for the past 7 years, fucking up everything that we thought was safety and stability and solid and secure in society, infrastructure, food and pathways, right? Anything that had to deal with the materiality of our existence. Uranus, even though it was a slow and steady kind of uncomfortable breaking, it was breaking all of that shit, showing us that the foundation was never solid to begin with. So with Taurus, with the Venus, this new moon being activated by Venus, Venus also ruling Taurus, Taurus about to prepare itself for having Uranus go back into it. We have to renegotiate these contracts, y'all, because they are coming for our food. They are coming for our livelihood. They're coming from the ability for us to sustain ourselves. And again, we are seeing it right now with the government using this government lock shutdowns to essentially wage war on citizens and threatening to not fund any SNAP benefits for November. So again, the cruelty. What happens if we remember and believe the present moment? Because a lot of shit going on, y'all. So let's get into a little bit of yapping what's going on, because what's going on here is we are seeing exactly what the state wants to do. So not only do we have these cuts to SNAP, right? We are also seeing how the government shutdowns are being used to essentially bully the Democrats to come back in and sign off on bills that are still going to heavily impact Americans because it's going to fuck up our healthcare, right, and our premiums for healthcare. And I'm not sitting here saying that the Dems are great. I'm saying that this is a strong arming technique, but at the expense of us. They are playing politics with our fucking lives, right? They are playing politics with our livelihood. They are playing politics also with our future. They're playing politics with our kids. Well, at the same time, they are telling us this is a nation, a Christian nation of family values. But the family is not worth a good goddamn because they don't give a fuck about the actual family itself. It is all about the facade and the story of the family and what it can do for a patriarchal structure. Jupiter in Cancer squares Saturn and Aries. When that, again, we are having to renegotiate and reevaluate and redefine what family is by understanding the ways it has been manipulated by the state. It is manipulated by power to get us to conform, when in actuality, it doesn't give a goddamn about the family at all. It doesn't give a goddamn about our kids. But now they're going to try to make it, as they've already revoked Roe v. Wade, and to make it a state issue, they are now trying to sneak in with the new law to try to outlaw the pill that I think 90% of abortion clinics and doctors use when a woman needs, or a person, who gives birth needs to have an abortion. They're trying to make that illegal. So therefore making abortion federally illegal. It's all of these goddamn smoke screens. It's all of the ways they move the floor. They constantly move the floor while claiming that they are doing all of these cuts and all of these kind of deep dives in order to get to the bottom of fraud. They're so concerned about fraud when they are the biggest frauds in the room, right? What we are seeing is, if we don't believe this current moment, if we don't feel this current moment, then they will continue to come and take our kids. Because they don't care, right? Kids are property, just like we are. And when you don't feed a population, when you don't give health care to a population, but you require that population to prove its worth to you, to have its basic needs met, then we are not living, y'all. We are literally walking dead. The dead are here, the dead are loud, the dead are knocking, and they are saying, what the fuck are we going to do about this? Now, I say that too because of this grand water trine. Memory, remembering. When we remember, when we come back, when we think about where we come from, we are thinking about our dead. We are thinking about the dead. We're thinking about who came before us that constructed these societies, these structures, these systems, and did they actually work for them? What were they thinking? And if they didn't for us in the present, then why do we keep invoking them? Why do we keep engaging with them? Do we even understand what they were trying to do? Have we misread, misunderstood, misappropriated them? All of these things are coming up right now, y'all. All of these things are coming up, and it's interesting because you can see them coming up in a couple of different conversations online as well. One, we had the passing of D'Angelo a few days ago, and D'Angelo is an R&B neo soul singer, but also much more than that. His music, his 3 albums were highly influential. A very brilliant musician. His album Voodoo was a beautiful kind of storytelling and reclamation of history of music, Black music, the musicality, the rehearsals of the band, right? The ways that he told stories, and even if you couldn't understand his words all the time, you could feel it in his invoking of the dead, of the ancestors, of different ways of being, right? But there was a way that D'Angelo talked about how he couldn't handle the public because of the way he was over sexualized. His untitled song, his video, How Does It Feel? Is iconic because it's just him naked and in a 360, right? But then people didn't see him, they just saw the body. They just saw his body. And because there was a way that he didn't have the ability to kind of negotiate that, he ended up being more reclusive, being kind of behind the scenes. Um, and in doing so, he had to reclaim his own sense of self. And even as he came back out and made it clear that he didn't want to be over sexualized, he was still over sexualized by many folks in the public. So there was no respect. And so when we think about, this idea of ancestors and community ancestors and how we respect the dead, how we honor the dead, we have to ask ourselves, how much do we honor the living? How much do we honor the living? How much do we allow ourselves to honor each other, to honor ourselves? And if we can't honor ourselves living, how the hell are we going to honor one another when we're dead? So there is a way that this new moon is also asking us to renegotiate the contracts and the relationships we have also to our dead. It really is. It's having us renegotiate the kind of relationships we are having, again, because we have that grand water trine happening at the same time. So Mercury and Mars in the deep waters of Scorpio, Saturn and Neptune in the deep waters of Pisces, and then Jupiter at the shore that bridges the sacred and the mundane, and Jupiter being the planet of philosophy and religion and spirit as well. This is a spiritual time. This is a time of spirit. But do we know how to work with spirit? Do we understand where spirit lies? Do you know where your spirit lies then? So there's also renegotiating the contract with ourselves. So something I recommend folks doing is writing down a new contract with yourself, and also a new contract even with your dead if you want. But start with the self. And you can do this as a writer. I don't know if I mentioned this before on here or not, but one thing a friend recommended for me to do about a year ago that I did that I liked, and developed it some more, is to create your own writer. Right? What are the things that are non-negotiable for you? What is the contract you want to engage with somebody else? And understanding that a contract is not a capitalistic endeavor, a contract is clarity. A contract allows us to understand what we are coming into and engaging with and why. A contract allows us to give ourselves permission to ask questions. If you don't understand something, you ask so that it is clearer in writing what the contract is, or clearer in speech what the contract is. Right? Exchange is needed here, but all we know is consumption. All we know is extraction. And we have been framed extraction and consumption as somehow reciprocal if we don't bring money into it. Money is not necessarily the problem. It is how people have weaponized and engaged with money and what they have commodified that now makes money. Okay. And when you commodify the body, as the body has been commodified through racial capitalism, we get the present moment. Exhaustion, burnout, in this promise of a so called technological future that is nothing more than the kind of warped fantasies of essentially white men who themselves lost their humanity. So they are striking back. But not instead of striking back against their own sense of self, they're striking back against the collective who they felt wronged them because they weren't the ones who were seen, as they were younger. And so this is a really interesting time because as we have this water trine happening, we also have the outer planets still in their long-term trine. Pluto, Saturn, and Pluto, Neptune, and Uranus are still in the conversation. So even as we're having all of this stuff happening, y'all, and you're going to hear a lot of astrologers talking about how this is beautiful and the best energy or the best astrology of 2025 because we have all these planets in signs of the domicile or exaltation, and so it's all about manifesting. It's going to be a great thing. I want us to, it's not about doom and gloom, but it's about put that in conversation with the fact that we're in a massive amount of change. So even what does that mean? What does having planets in domicile in the present moment mean? Right. Again, Jupiter in Cancer has not been some great, expansion of joy and love and all this shit that people were saying because it's in its sign of joy when it's in Cancer, a sign of exaltation, excuse me, when it's in Cancer. It has expanded our understanding of Cancerian themes, right? It's expanded the ways that we engage with, again, family and feeling and empathy and care. And we live in a fucked up society, y'all. So of course this transit is not going to be love and light necessarily. It's going to be reality. It's going to be a mirror. It's going to be an expansion of the things that we choose not to believe, that we choose not to engage in. Doesn't mean that we got to sit here. It means that in order for us to have the energy of these transits actually be fruitful for us individually and collectively, the first thing we're going to have to do is believe our reality. There's going to have to be a death and transformation of the understanding that we are in a time of change, that we are in a time of change via chaos, which means that these transits are asking us to renegotiate how we even understand what benefit looks like, what a benefit is, how we engage with our own power and sense of self, right? How we engage with structures that have lied to us and how that has allowed us to lie to ourselves. There was the No Kings protest yesterday, and I've been listening to folks talk about it online. I hadn't intended to go for a number of different reasons, but I haven't done protests in public for a few years now for personal reasons. And because protesting is one way, but not the only way for change. And something that I've been thinking a lot about the past few years about the power of the protest and its purpose, right? And how it has been centered and central to a lot of movements in the past 10 years or so. I've really been thinking about, well, how effective have they been? Right. And asking the question can give people in their feelings because the question itself to some folks indicates that one is saying that protests don't work. That's not what I'm saying. I'm asking the question. Other folks rely upon saying, well, this is what they did before. And so this is how we get freedom now. But that's also not answering that question, right? The question of have they worked actually should get us into more questions. Well, what does work mean? What was the goal? Do we have a goal? Was the goal one that was mutually agreed upon? If not, how was the overall goal decided upon? What was the outcome and impact of other goals that were left to the wayside? And was there ever any time to really sit down and pause and ask after the fact if the goal was so unquote, quote unquote, met via that kind of action? Was the consequences, was the actual thing given for the goal, did it meet up its expectations? Right? That's the analysis. That's the analysis that we have to do. And so the No Kings protest, right? I want us to kind of think about that analysis. What was the goal? Right? What was the goals? How are they defined? What is the follow through? Right? If some people are calling it a more of a rally, I think versus a protest, whatever it is, what was the goal? What is the goal or goals? And how are we going to measure so that we are moving action, not just seeing that as the action and then going back to our everyday lives? Right. So this is also part of these kind of energies this week is, well, then we may have to do some renegotiation, right? What is the contract? What are we trying to create? What are we trying to do? Right? What is the cultural working that needs to be worked so that we are working into a different future? This really is a time of conjure, y'all. It truly is a time in which we can work with the sacred and mundane, but you can only do that if you are in your own sacred, if you are in your own spirit, if your body has space, right? If you have made space to be able to engage with your spirit so that you can understand which spirit you want to engage with. I'm going to talk about this more in my seminar on Thursday with Death and the Ancestors, but this is why I talk about the remaking of the family. Saturn having a conversation with Jupiter. Saturn's in the deep waters. Remember that. Jupiter's in the shallow waters. We can renegotiate timelines. That's not like some woo-woo shit. That's literally what the cosmos is saying. We have possibilities open. Neptune going back in there this week, after the new moon and when the sun moves into Scorpio, right? We are literally in a Scorpio season that is heavily influenced by the waters, all the waters. Scorpio season is going to be crazy in all kinds of ways because we're going to have a lot of planets there that is giving us the personal power, the personal will to move some shit, to get into deep some shit. But a Scorpio is a butcher. Remember that. A Scorpio is also a researcher and it can smell bullshit. Right? It can smell some bullshit. But do we believe the smell that we are smelling and then have action strategies from that? So this again is about what are the practices that we are using for cleansing and protection. All right, I want you to talk about that cleansing and protection in the Patreon. In our divination study sessions, we're going to be talking about protection and cleansing tomorrow. I was going to do numerology, but because of the energies and what's going on, we're actually going to do some magical correspondence work and talking through what does protection and cleansing look like, especially in this moment, because it's more than just herbs, y'all. Herbs are one part of it, and water is part of it, but it's also how we create ritual around being able to kind of ground in the body with different types of elements, right? With different types of kind of herbs and yeah, elements, but also with people. So we'll talk about that tomorrow for the divination study session, okay? But with this, right, there is a cleansing and protection that needs to happen because as we go into Scorpio season, right, we're going to have to believe the ghosts and the monsters knocking at the door. We're going to have to believe. And we're also going to have to believe that we could be those ghosts and monsters too. We're going to have to believe that we will let those monsters or ghosts in that we already have. So if we kind of sit in this quote unquote spooky season and get into the ways that horror reveals truth in society, then if we face the horrors that many times we have been taught to nostalgia away, to melancholy away, right? To disassociate away, if we face the horrors, there is a way that horror stories also have a purpose. It gets us to see what is going on, but also do something different, right? Create a new pathway, kill the ghosts, hit the monsters, whatever it is. I love horror for this reason. Horror is a genre along with comedy, honestly, but horror is a genre that allows us to tackle the monsters of society through avatars, but also there is a way that we are shown that we have the power to defeat those monsters, to overtake those ghosts, to exorcise them out, whatever it is, okay? And also horror gets us to kind of re-examine who the monster is, right? How many folks have been like doing the Disney villains and folks are like, well, are certain villains really villainous or was there a reason why they acted the way they did? So again, as we even growing up into these kind of stories we were taught from childhood and this idea of heroes and villains, right? The monsters and the ones to save us, even the ideas of saviors and monsters, as we mature and as we can come back into and come from the present, use the present to have us understand those memories, we can then also re-engage with and see the ways we've been groomed to buy into our oppression and why we got to retell the story of who the damn hero is, because we have to re-understand where the actual monsters lie. We were talking about this in the Patreon, y'all. If you were with me talking when we read Ring Shout, I got that video up, but it's part of this ongoing kind of conversation I'm having with folks at the landscape tier and higher around gods, monsters, and humans, and that relationship between those three, the Trinity, essentially, and how we can reimagine that Trinity by working with and engaging with literature. So we're using N.K. Jemison's work with the Inheritance trilogy, Ring Shout, and a couple of other things that I'll be adding on to that, along with the albums we're listening to. So we're doing those listening sessions, and those listening sessions, the themes of the albums we listen to each month aligns with the theme that we are reading to give us an overall understanding of how we have to retell story. But we're retelling stories, y'all, by remembering. So if you've been following, working with me with this, all of those exercises and those kind of communings we do together is to get us to sit in the body and bring up memory, but have that memory sit with you in the present, and having and learning how to interrogate it, and learning how to work with it, right? Learning how to work with yourself, your higher self, by going into your own memories and having to many times reparent your younger selves. We're going to be talking a lot about reparenting this month, as we listen to Cleo Soul's mother. This is it this week? Yeah, this week. And then next week, the salon, as we finish up N.K. Jemison's. Where's that book at? It's somewhere. I think it's the Kingdoms. I forgot the Kingdoms, the third book. This is a continuing conversation, but it's aligning with the astrology, because the astrology again is asking us, is kind of demanding that we again take responsibility for the futures, the world we say we want, by becoming present and believing the world we are in now. You cannot dream of something new, y'all, if you do not face where you are at. Otherwise, again, you are sitting not only in nostalgia, you're sitting in delusion. And Delulu is not the Salulu all the time. Okay. I have learned that I can tell myself some bullshit, y'all, especially when it comes to relationships. I be mentioning a little bit. I'm trying to tell my whole business, but this whole kind of dating thing, in your 40s, after marriage, coming out, all this shit, right? It is some shit that you have got to be grounded in. Let me tell you something right now. It is I feel like I am raw dog in life as a late in life lesbian. Okay. And this shit is ghetto. Because every motherfucking story that I did not know I've been telling myself is coming up in every goddamn relationship I've been in, right? And it's been an interesting kind of mirror, right? It's been an interesting reflection of relationship. And I got a Venus in Libra and a moon in Taurus. So I'm a Scorpio rising. So Mars and Venus are loud in my chart, okay? Partied in Venus, woke up in Mars is my energy, all right? But my Venus is in Libra in the 12th house, and my moon in Taurus is conjunct my goddamn Chiron in the 7th house. So it's like, goddamn, can a bitch get a break in any of this? It's like mama wombs, triggers, right? Hidden enemies, secret affairs, all this shit. And that's been kind of true. It's been kind of true, but it doesn't have to be the only truth. And so something that I'm really having to sit with is just how good my Delulu can be. Baby, I can make a motherfucking story. I can tell a story to myself and sell myself that story. When I talk about daydreaming, right? I use it as strategy, y'all, because it's all I know how to do. It's like if I can see it, if there's a way that I can literally see it in a vision, if it comes into a daydream, if it shoots down in an idea, if I dream it when I'm sleeping and it sticks with me, the minute I know I can think it and it's clear, I know I can do it. Right. This is where my Scorpio rising, I work with it because I got Uranus right there on my ascendant too. So I can pick a bone, right? I can get very, I can get very much narrow-minded and deep into research. It's why I finished my degree at 29, right? Like a bitch can focus. But that obsession, right? That obsession needs to be put into an energy that is helpful and not detrimental. So if I'm not working in that energy, if I'm not actually using it to kind of create and to kind of be embodying and to feel my feelings, then I will tell myself a story and somebody likes me and I'm like, I don't know, maybe, but then I'm in a certain type of kind of state, then I would tell myself, no, I can like them too, right? I can tell myself stories that then downplay what I actually want in favor of trying to compromise, right, in a relationship that that ain't even fucking started yet, but I've already made it 8 years down the line in my head on accident because I'm so used to thinking about the future, right? We are trained to always be in the future or in the past, but never present. And we do that in different ways. And so I've had to learn how my grooming has happened. My grooming is not being present many times in relationships, seeing the potential. And I don't mean that, and I see the potential. I really do mean like sometimes I will see somebody's future. I have predicted for folks that they would be the first provost of this, they would be the first president of that. You're going to be here. And I've been fucking right. Okay, it's a pattern recognition. If I'm looking at you and I'm seeing what you're doing and we're engaging, there is a way that I can many times see a path or see a couple of paths for you. The thing is, what I am seeing in the reality don't always match. So sometimes the shit that I am so-called seeing is for me, not for everybody else. And that is just for me just to know, but not actually do anything with it. Here my ass goes planning a whole goddamn story, going down goddamn Delulu land, right? Not really understanding that that is not the reality I'm in. So I've had to renegotiate contracts in my life when it comes to one of my relationships in which I have to get clear about what it is I want and be okay with that. That was interesting for me. Being okay with what I want, not sitting and focusing on where the compromise is off the bat. Because if we focus on the compromise first, y'all, without getting clear about what your foundation is, you will always be compromising parts of your humanity. And you can't build any kind of solid foundation on that because you're lying to yourself, you're lying to somebody else, they're lying to themselves, they're lying to you. So you're building a whole fucking relationship with a house of cards. And the house of cards is going to fall the minute those kind of assumptions get thrown to you in the face. Renegotiate the contracts. And so something for me that I'm really thinking a lot about is renegotiating the contract that I have with myself. And when it comes to what would it look like to actually embody what it is I want in a relationship and be okay with that. Right? Be okay with that. So then what am I doing? Oh, well, here comes the goddamn mama wombs and the daddy wombs, right? And having to renegotiate and go back into my past and think about reparenting. And so I want you to think about this, y'all. Look at your chart and look at where the water signs are. Okay, so for me as a Scorpio rising, it's the first house, the fifth house, and the ninth house. So this makes a lot of sense. The fifth house is children and childhood. Saturn and Neptune for me are going right there. So me having to renegotiate the relationship I have with myself via my younger self, via my childhood, right? The little Nikki kind of in me makes a lot of sense because that is what has been impacting my understanding of family and care. The ninth house where Jupiter is, and that's the foundation of higher self, God, but also philosophy of life, which then impacts myself. Okay, so I'm giving that as an example because we all have some shit to do, work to do. We all been groomed in some way, right, to understand contracts and our sense of selves in certain ways. And so the chart can help us figure out where that is. So you can look to your Libra and Taurus houses to see kind of the impact of this new moon. Not every transit is going to impact you personally, but because we're in this massive change societally, right? Societal change is happening, so that will have a personal impact. But then when we're talking about our emotions and this grand trine and what is being brought up, the houses where your water signs are will give you an indication of the kind of spaces and places that memory will come from, where you'll be asked to kind of remember and how to face those memories via your emotions and how do you work with them? How does that help you then again renegotiate these contracts of your life? And these are the partnerships, not just romantic, but business and platonic. And I realized something. There's a way all of this stuff is interrelated, right? So business practices and how I thought I was supposed to show up in business, especially working for myself, the first couple of years were hard. And I talk about this hopefully to help others. I was coming out of higher ed, right? Very much justice focused spaces, doing a lot of stuff in which I felt like I didn't want to take up too much space. It was always about the collective, always about the project, right? The goal of freedom, all this stuff. Again, picking a bone is something I can do. But there was an expense to that. The expense was me. Sometimes for my staff, like before we were able to get real funding, I was doing a lot of the logistics while also leading it and training and doing all this stuff. I remember having a staff retreat and we were doing a bunch of strategic planning for the year, for the next year. It was summertime. We had a long year. We were tired. I wanted to alleviate some of the burden for some of my staff. So I said I would take care of the logistics and food and stuff like that. So we had lunch I was planning out this day. And so I had placed everyone's order for up the street. I had forgotten to order for me. So I didn't realize it until we had collected the food, I brought it in, passed it out, and then I realized, oh, I had nothing. And a bitch was hungry. Right. And that was an interesting moment because folks that worked with me, they were like, Nicole, they were really gentle with it, but they were like, you kind of do this, like you need to kind of slow down sometimes and like realize that if you don't kind of take care of you, you can't take care of any of this. But that can be sometimes hard when you're also taught your whole life that other people come before you and you have to prove your worth to be seen by them. Right. And again, I know other folks have gone through that. right? And that was my family. That was the family structure. I'm an eldest daughter of seven, right? And so I'm a third parent essentially. And both my parents are much older. They're not boomers. They're silent generation. So I've got silent generation parents who birth millennials. I'm the oldest millennial. My youngest brother is the absolute youngest millennial. Talked about this before. Woo! When your daddy learned how to swim because they threw his ass in a pool after he had polio and survived the iron lung before antibiotics were even invented. And if he was literally the generation that had bought the first pair of jeans ever made, Levi's, and he would tell me stories about how they bought the one pair because that's all they could afford, right? I think it was a few cents, and that he would put it on, and then they would sit in a cold bathtub, and so that they can get the jeans wet, so that they would dry on them, so they would mold themselves to their bodies. And then he actually had a T-Bird. You know them cars, y'all, the T-Bird with an actual T-Bird on the hood? I said, bitch, I thought that was a whole goddamn movie. That was his life. I realized that that's how you grew up. Ideas of care and how you define nurturing are a bit different. Right? It's a bit different. And then when your mama grew up in Jim Crow South, right? The youngest of five from sharecroppers and farmers, right? And folks who got mental health issues dealing with living in the South. There's a whole lot of shit going on, right? And so there is a way that thinking about the renegotiation of the contract that I'm having to do now via relationships and love and care and nurturing, right? I understand that it makes sense, right? We are groomed by the structures that we are introduced to, which is the family first, y'all. Our family structures introduce us into this thing called life, into this thing called being human. But if our family structures are trying to figure out how to just barely fucking survive in structures that were not made for them, right? Then we have to take the time right now and renegotiate those contracts by taking a step back and remembering and analyzing it from the present, right? That's how we heal. Chiron is in this conversation. Chiron and Aries wants us to kind of face the wounding of the self, the body, how we believe the self, and how the self shows up in relationship. Again, the opposite sign of being Libra. So as everything has been going through Libra, next week we'll talk about this. Venus is going to oppose Chiron as well. The sun was opposing all this week. We've had Mars opposing it, right? This is going to get personal, right? The personal and the political are in a conversation right now because we have to believe. We have to believe ourselves. We have to believe ourselves and how the self shows up or does not show up in the contract, in the relationship, and what influenced that. And what influenced that, right, are these water signs. It's the ways that we have been taught or not taught how to deal with our emotions, deal with our body, deal with what our bodies need, and not being ashamed of that. Right? Patriarchy fucks us all up, y'all. Patriarchy fucks us all up because it doesn't allow us to understand what our body needs. It makes us self-surveillance ourselves first and conform ourselves and not believe ourselves because we see emotions as bad, as feminine, as somehow weak, when that is the strongest thing that you can hold on to. If you feel deeply and then you understand that feeling that can come through sharply, whether it be high or low, right? If you really understand what that feeling is telling you, that emotion is trying to speak to you, well, then you are embodied in your spirit. That is your spirit talking to you. You are alive. You are fully human. You're not walking dead. You're not a shell of yourself. You are human. But with the human is what has been commodified. If the human is what is seen as valuable in an extractive economy, Libra rules economies, y'all. Libra's about the money. The economic system, as I've said before, of a society is predicated and dictates a social and political one. They're in this conversation. That trinity is real, right? If we can renegotiate that by taking back the commodity that leaves us non-human, dehumanized, and that commodity is the body via the emotions, right? Then you got to realize that it's the most powerful thing about you to feel. Doesn't mean it's going to feel good. Doesn't mean it's going to be comfortable. Uranus going through Taurus for 7 years really had to shook up this idea of comfort, y'all. And retrograding back is going to remind us what are the definitions and whose lens inside are we using to define safety and security and comfort and stability. Because none of this shit was stable. We are fed a lie. We are fed a story that if we believe right now we are seeing does not work. Right? It's not sustainable. The fact again that man can go in and dismantle the government system in 5 months and is continuing to do so means that it was never stable. It was always a house of cards, right? But what happens when the cards have fallen and now we are being asked to pick up and remake the cards, right? Remake the contract, remake our relationship to other forms of life. Because when we talk about Libra, right, and we're talking about Venus herself, Venus is culture. Venus is refinement. Venus understands that strategy because Venus is a warrior still, too. Don't ever forget this. Venus is a warrior, but she wars and strategizes differently than Mars. So when the two come together, there is a symmetry there, right? There is a relationship there between Venus and Mars. It is the personal planet that expresses our understanding of our passion, our strategy, our drive, our sex, along with our love and our care and our money and our compassion and our beauty. It's creation energy. Venus and Mars coming together, they create. You can create a new life, either a physical life, kind of cultural life, a spiritual life. New life is created. It's creation, right? But what are we creating now? But next week we have, what do we have going on next week? Next week, oh, Mercury goes into Sagittarius, y'all. And we get Venus starting to oppose Chiron and square Jupiter. So we're going to continue this conversation that we're having, right, about the kind of stories and the contracts and negotiations we have. And we're going to continue this because with that full moon in Taurus comes in about 2 weeks, with Uranus also then going back into Taurus, this conversation with Venus and the Venetian themes of contracts, justice, law, economies, and infrastructure, food, the body itself, and how we care for that and safety and stability and security are all going to be very loud. And especially since we're having, again, in the US, these kind of threats of cuts, the ways in which the politicians are using our lives and livelihood to show us just how unstable things are, this is going to be getting louder. So what I recommend, again, please face your reality, y'all, by getting in your body and feeling your emotions. It's a lot of shit going on right now. If we ignore that, if we disassociate from that, if we refuse to fully engage with it, then collectively in the US especially, we are going to refuse to understand that we are already here. We're going to think we're special, that American exceptionalism will pop out. It is already popping out, thinking that we ain't like all the other countries, that our government completely decimated, right, and put these faux authorities in. No, our government has shown us its template over the past 50 plus years of exactly what it will do when it goes in and disrupts the state's economic, governmental, and political system, right, and what it will implement in its place to maintain power. If we believe that and we understand it and realize that how it can show up here, right, will be in different ways. And then that allows us to get present. Then that nostalgia for a past that wasn't really there can go away and be transmuted so that we can then reanalyze the past to help us in the present day strategy. And this, again, is why we need to renegotiate the contracts in our lives. The first one with ourselves. Okay? All right, y'all. Thanks for joining me. If you're in Chicago again, you can see me tonight at Jackhammer for Funk Stick. I'll be doing readings there. You can see me Tuesday at Dorothy's. We're going to have a drink, talk about spirit, bring spirit down, and listen to some music after. Or we can do it online, y'all. Join me as I teach a couple of seminars through Big Liz Conjure, working with death and the ancestors, working with Pluto, and then understanding your spiritual gifts with astrology. That'll be on Thursday, and then next Monday I'll have it in the show notes of how you can sign up and where you can find me. Okay, and then I'll be back next Sunday at 11 a.m. Central Standard Time for taping of the show. And I'm glad, Danielle. I'm glad that this resonated. All right. So thanks, y'all. Appreciate you listening. And as always, keep dreaming, keep exploring, because it's through the dreamscapes we can bring the future state we want to bring into the present. Till next time. One hand to heaven. heaven, the other pointed straight to hell. Right hand as strong as the left, dancing in the shadows with myself and the dead. The shadows on the walls, a mirror to the self. Why stay stagnant and allow the flames to consume you? Dance with them and conjure under the new moon. One hand to heaven, the other a guide to the other side where the dead reside. You gotta use both hands to feel your feet if you wanna defeat the demons masquerading as human.
Wondering, scratch that wondering, trying to find a meaning to it all. Morning is coming, but I ain't running. I'm just dancing with the shadows on the wall. To get to heaven, I went through hell, and now I see it all for what it is. Battling demons to fight for freedom, but surrender is the only way to win. Shadow dancing, playing with the light in the dark. Shadow dancing, playing with the light in the dark.
Justice for the dead, life for the living. What is key is we need to sing a song of freedom from tyranny. One hand to heaven, the other conjuring the dead, who know the songs and actions of freedom that are needed for us in the times ahead.
Fear and rage, define the age, and everybody's hiding from the truth. Stuck together for all alone, and haunted by the shadows in the room. But that's tomorrow's and yesterdays, racing to leave something behind. The end is really the beginning when you're dancing on the edges of time. A shadow dancing, playing with the light in the dark. A shadow dancing, playing with the light in the dark. A shadow dancing, playing with the light in the dark. A shadow dancing, playing with the light in the dark.
One hand to heaven, the other in the underworld. Under the wood, the trunk of a tree, strong, sturdy, weather-bearing. Offerings laid, prayers are made. Now for the summoning. Dance with the shadows, songs erupting as the lips and hips move to the drumming. One hand to heaven, the other on the other side. Justice for the living requires justice for those on the other side.
A shadow dancing, playing with the light in the dark. A shadow dancing, playing with the light in the dark. A shadow dancing, playing with the light in the dark.
other pointed straight to hell. Right hand is strong as the left. Dancing in the shadows with myself and the dead. The shadows on the walls, a mirror to the self. Why stay stagnant and allow the flames to consume you? Dance within and conjure under the new moon. One hand to heaven, the other a guide to the other side where our dead reside. Hear the ancestors call out. You gotta use both hands and feel your feet if you wanna defeat the demons masquerading as humans. Cause we've been here before. Time a loop of remembering and forgetting to remember once again. Of times before those shadows of former selves. One hand to heaven, the other to the past. That brought a present, a shell of the self. One hand to heaven, call down your head and dance in the light of self-knowing. The other hand extends down to the land, a remembrance, a signal to awaken the dead and rise up in glory. Hallelujah! Say their names and watch the shadows dance among the flames. Righteous justice. Libra, fully balanced.